Good morning, everybody. I'm Don Stewart, and welcome to our Wednesday edition of Breaking News. Today is the 9th day of July, 2025, and here is the latest. Well, the visit of Prime Minister Netanyahu to Washington is becoming a cause for exasperation as the United States and Israel do not seem to be on the same page with respect to the complicated situation in Gaza. And to add to this, a lack of precise details about what is taking place makes everything all the more frustrating. In other words, we wish we had more we could tell you, but we just don't. What's been going on? Well, we withheld actually doing a second edition of Breaking News yesterday because of an added meeting between Netanyahu and Trump last night. And we were waiting for some type of explanation as what the need was for. Why did they have this added meeting and what was specifically discussed? And we waited and we waited and we waited, and no answer was given. So we're still waiting for more details, but here's what we know as of the moment, and this is the best we can do because there's just lack of information. Here's the headline. This is from Times of Israel. Netanyahu quietly leaves White House without announcement of breakthrough in Gaza talks. This is from the Times of Israel, as we just mentioned. The Prime Minister's second sit down with Trump in as many days ends with no public component. Witkoff delays his Doha trip and signs that talks are not yet ripe, expressing optimism a deal can be reached this week. Remember, they were expecting a hostage ceasefire deal to be reached this week, and we hit a roadblock here. All right, what's going on? Let's see if we can summarize what's taking place and see where we're at right now. All right. Prime Minister Netanyahu wrapped up his second White House meeting with U.S. President Donald Trump in as many days without any public announcement of a breakthrough in the ongoing Gaza ceasefire and the hostage release talks, which was the primary topic of the sit down. The possibility of such a declaration appeared to rise when the meeting was publicly added to Netanyahu's schedule just hours in advance, with Trump saying he would discuss the Gaza Strip, while U.S. Special Envoy Special Envoy Steve Witkoff expressed hope a deal could be reached this week. We're already on Wednesday. Well, here's where we're at. Here comes the but. But as Netanyahu and Trump met for over an hour in the Oval Office, along with U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance, two sources familiar with the matter told the Times of Israel that Witkoff decided to push back his flight to Doha, Qatar, where he had been slated to join the ongoing proximity talks between Israel and Hamas. He initially was slated to fly out yesterday, Tuesday, the sources said, adding that a new departure date has yet to be scheduled. The U.S. envoy informed mediators that he still plans to travel to Doha in order to, quote, help bring the deal across the finish line, with his decision to push back the trip indicating that a significant amount of progress still needed to be made. You got that? A significant amount of progress still needed to be made. The Saudi Ashwark news outlet cited unnamed informed sources who reported that the fifth round of proximity talks in Qatar ended Tuesday night without any significant progress. In other words, there's no progress being made, so there's not a real opportunity, it seems, to get any deal very soon. All right, a Palestinian official, now here's their take on it, told the news site that talks were at a standstill, charging that, of course, it's the Israeli negotiating team is limiting itself to listening rather than negotiating and consulting on every issue with Netanyahu and Strategic Affairs Minister Ron Dermer, the lead Israeli negotiator who is accompanying the premier in Washington. Remember, they sent the second string to Doha. The people that are there are not negotiators, they're just listening. They have no power, no authority whatsoever. And this is frustrating, I guess, the people in Qatar and Hamas, because every time they get asked a question, they have to contact Netanyahu or Dermer, who are in Washington, D.C., meeting with Donald Trump. So nothing seems to be going forward, as it were. The Palestinian official claimed that the Israeli team lacks the authority, which they do, to make actual decisions, a continuation, they claim, of the stalling policy of Netanyahu to obstruct any potential agreement. Shortly before Netanyahu met with Trump on Tuesday, a delegation of senior Qatari officials held talks with Witkoff for 3 hours at the White House to discuss the hostage negotiations, a source familiar with the matter said. Remember, Qatar is on the side of Hamas all the way. They're not an honest broker, and yet they're the nations that have been chosen to be this sort of mediator here, along with Egypt. All right. At the conclusion of the meeting with Trump, Netanyahu said the discussions, quote, focused on efforts to free the hostages. All right, some generic answer, meaning not telling us anything. We're not letting up for a moment. And this is possible because of the military pressure exerted by our heroic soldiers He said in a video shot in the Blair House, "Unfortunately, this effort is exacting a painful price for us and the loss of our best sons." He stressed that Israel is determined to achieve all of its goals in Gaza, the release of all of our hostages, both living and dead, the elimination of Hamas's military and governing capabilities, and ensuring that Gaza no longer poses a threat to Israel. Now, that's what they want to accomplish. Here comes, however, he said he also discussed with Trump advanced the implication possibilities of the operation Israel and the U.S. carried out against Iran. That's a whole other subject, which we actually have a ton of stuff to share with you about. But this Gaza thing is taking up all the headlines now because of what's going on now as we continue on. Opportunities are opening up for expanding the circle of peace, expanding the Abraham Accords, as Netanyahu said, and we're working with full vigor. All right, here we go. The remaining obstacle, and here seems to be the problem, is the partial withdrawal of the IDF from Gaza during the period of the 60-day truce, a U.S. official and a source familiar with the talk said. Israel is insisting that it remains in what's called the Morag Corridor in southern Gaza, near where it says it plans to create a humanitarian city in which the Strip's entire population will be herded and prevented from leaving once they've been vetted. Due to disagreements over the parameters of the IDF withdrawal from Gaza during the 60-day truce being negotiated in Doha, Israel now is slated to submit a new set of maps on Wednesday showing its proposed redeployment of troops after the previous version was rejected by Hamas, a source familiar with the negotiation told the Times of Israel. So I guess Hamas has the veto here, and they said, we don't like them being here, so Israel must submit a new set of maps of where they'll be. A compromise on the issue will take more time to secure, the source said, declining to elaborate further. While the U.S. offered Hamas, get this, a verbal assurance on Tuesday through mediators that Trump will personally make sure, get this, that personally make sure the temporary truce remains in place, even if an agreement is not reached on a permanent ceasefire by the 60-day truce. One of the Arab diplomats said it was not likely to suffice. In other words, Trump's going to give his word that the temporary truce will remain in place even after the 60 days because they're going towards a complete, total ceasefire here and the end of the fighting. However, Hamas wants the text of the ceasefire to state that the truce will remain in place as long as negotiations on a permanent ceasefire continue, dropping the condition included in an earlier version that the talks be held in good faith. The Arab diplomats at the source familiar said Hamas feels Israel would use the clause to abandon the ceasefire as it did in March. In other words, they want to guarantee that this will end the war at the end of the 60 days. So the ceasefire is the first part of a final agreement, according to Hamas, what they want, and get this over with. So summing up, Trump wants the campaign in Gaza to end with a permanent ceasefire, while Israel is insisting it cannot happen until its goals are reached. Hamas continues to make demands about the war ending after the 60-day truce is up. So as of this moment, Israel said to be redrawing the map of where their military will be stationed during the ceasefire. Exactly what's going to happen next is anyone's guess. The outcome remains to be seen. All in all, the situation is very, very confusing because of the lack of information we're getting. And so, what it seems, there's not been a lot of fanfare about Netanyahu's trip this time in Washington, D.C. Basically, as Trump said earlier, he's firm with Netanyahu. Seemingly, the war has to end and has to end now, has to end soon. And Netanyahu is saying, well, we've got to achieve our goals. We can't let Hamas remain in power. We can't compromise. And yet, who knows what's going to be the end of all this? It's very, very frustrating. So, again, basically, we're giving you what we have. And the problem we have here is we're not getting a whole lot of information about what's actually going on behind the scenes and what Israel will end up doing. Netanyahu said from the beginning that Hamas can no longer be in Gaza. They can't, rule there. There has to be a security for Israel. So October 7th from 2023 doesn't happen again. But when they're insisting on getting some type of deal for the 60-day ceasefire, that's what's complicating the matters. Plus, you got this issue. Can you imagine after the 60 days, there's still going to be about 8 to 10 hostages that are still alive. They're there in Gaza. And Hamas is not going to give them up. They're not going to give them up because there's no motivation to do that because that would be the end of Hamas. So what's going to happen? We just don't know. It's a huge mess. And right now we're at a kind of a stalemate. So we're doing the best we can, giving you what we got. We'll do another broadcast later today, no matter what happens. We won't wait for any type of announcement. No announcement may be forthcoming. Now, like I said, we do have a lot of information on Iran, which is fascinating. We would like to give you, but this situation now with Trump and Netanyahu in D.C. is front and center with all the discussions, and basically has a huge, huge impact on what the future of Israel will be, the Middle East, etc. So that's why we're harping on this thing rather than anything else. All right, I'm Don Stewart. Wish we could have more for you. That's all we got. And until next time, as always, may the Lord richly, richly bless.